Hello and welcome. I'm Anand Naidu sitting in for Riz Khan. The fighting is over in Sri Lanka's civil war. Now attempts are being made to reach a political settlement. The Sri Lankan government has announced local elections will be held in two key areas in the mainly Tamil north. Within the next 3 months, the government will also have to address the worsening humanitarian situation. The immediate challenge for the government is to resettle more than 250,000 people displaced by the war. UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon toured refugee camps this weekend and pressed the government to allow the UN and aid agencies full access. On today's show, we take a look at the worsening humanitarian situation in Sri Lanka and the political fallout and ask, what's next for Sri Lanka's Tamil population? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. Log on to livestation.com/AJE, enter the chat room, and then take part. We, of course, also welcome your phone calls on this show. Joining me to discuss the issue from London, Jan Jananagayam of the NGO Tamils Against Genocide, a human rights group. She's standing as an independent candidate in the upcoming European parliamentary elections. From New York, Dr. Anna Neistat, a senior researcher at Human Rights Watch. She investigates human rights violations in crisis situations. And here with me in Washington, Ambassador Devinder R. Subasinghe, Sri Lanka's former ambassador to the United States and Mexico. Welcome to all of you to the program. Jan Jananagayam, let me start with you. This has been a long and bitter war. Hundreds of thousands of Tamils are still being held in camps, and we've heard of widespread and brutal human rights abuses committed by both sides. Do you believe, given all those circumstances, that there is a chance for reconciliation between the two communities in Sri Lanka right now?
I think that it is too early to talk about reconciliation. I don't think the Tamil community is ready for that. I certainly don't think the Tamil diaspora is ready to discuss it. At the moment, the diaspora is in a state of mourning and shock, and that is exactly what I think we should be allowed to do. But I also think that the next step for us is that we'll be looking for justice. We think we've been betrayed by the international community. We think that no one stepped in to stop the massacre of Tamil civilians. And so we think it's far too early to talk about anything else except effectively grief and justice.
Ambassador, we're hearing words there like massacre, justice. Do you believe there's a good chance of reconciliation in Sri Lanka after this war?
I believe we have to. After almost 3 decades of violence, it is time to reach out to reconcile and find a way forward. A way forward that is homegrown, that is not distorted by the presence of the LTTE. That has to be the way forward, and we must start as soon as possible this process of reaching across and the healing process and the reconciliation.
What do you believe are the first steps that the government should be taking?
I think I had the benefit of having a long conversation with President Rajapaksa over the weekend, just to refresh myself on what the current thinking is. And I think this is an individual that one says what he means and means what he says. He has reached out. He has clearly stated that he wants to see a Sri Lanka devoid of majority and minority distinctions. He has also talked about the need for a homegrown solution, and I think this is the time for all communities to step up and engage without any distortions of either outside models and other such experimentation or the distortion of the LTTE, which has now been defeated.
Okay, let me go to Anna Neistat in New York. Dr. Neistat, we've heard a lot and we've seen a lot about the humanitarian situation in Sri Lanka, about the conditions in these camps where the Tamil population, many of the Tamil population are now being held. What has Human Rights Watch found in its research in this area?
Well, I first of all would like to mention that we obviously focused our research not just on the camps, but also on what has been going on in the so-called no-fire zone, in the conflict areas. But in terms of the camps, we believe that these camps obviously have nothing to do with so-called welfare centers, the way the government calls them, that these are de facto internment camps, and this internment is indefinite so far. We did hear government assurances that everybody is supposed to be resettled by the end of the year. In 6 months, there were different assurances at different times, but so far we have not seen any steps taken by the government to move any closer to this resettlement. There are no procedures for people to be processed. Some combatants are being taken out, but there are no procedures for non-combatants to be released. As you said, there are currently more than 250,000 people deprived of their freedom with no basis and for no reason.
I think if I may just step in there, Anand, I think there is a process that has to be instituted. This is a huge, large number of displaced personnel. There's also the complicating factor of upward of 5,000 LTT cadres that are reported to be in these camps. I think we need to be very certain that the process of release and resettlement happens in a very orderly fashion, and I think the international community has a very key role to play in helping the government and the NGOs understand how to deal with this very unprecedented situation and to do it and get it right.
I completely disagree. You have said that there are upwards of 250,000 civilians, that would be women, children and elderly people, in those so-called camps or concentration camps as we call them. But there are only, by your own estimation, there are 5,000 LTT, you say. But to me, that's a 50-to-1 ratio. You cannot hold an entire population of a region in prison under the conditions that you're holding them. And this is exactly what happened in the safe zone. Those people that were in the safe zone were massacred. And the ratios, it's 50-to-1. It's ridiculous. It's simply not acceptable. And people are innocent unless proven guilty. I mean, you must remember that. This is why we say this is an ethnic war. It's a race war. It's the ratios are insane. If you're Tamil, there's an assumption that there are 5,000 LTT people. Actually, there are probably 5,000 young men and women. And that there's an assumption that the presumption of innocence is simply not being met.
I think at this time...
Can I just say a word of...
At this time, I think it's very important to dial down the rhetoric, dial down the labels, look at the practical issue. Yes, there are 250,000 mothers, daughters, children, and other pregnant mothers as well in these camps. I think we need to dial off the rhetoric and focus on practical solutions.
I'm sorry,
to
it's
their
not
conditions.
rhetoric when people are kept in camps. It's not rhetoric. The Telegraph has reported that 60%, and I saw this report, that 60% of the people in camps have serious injuries. How did that happen? It's not rhetoric. We want answers.
I would totally agree that it's not about rhetoric. It's about camps surrounded by 3 layers of barbed wire, and I saw it with my own eyes. So no matter what Sri Lankan government is trying to say to the international community, I will really talk about what I saw there. And it's speaking of the international community and the kind of access that the international community is supposed to have, I would absolutely agree that this is the kind of process where international community should play a prominent role. But so far, as of today, as far as we understand, even the minimal access that international community had to these camps, and we're talking not journalists, not human rights organizations, we're talking just humanitarians, and even this access has been cut. Vehicles are not being allowed to enter the camps. And as in response to that, some humanitarian agencies and ICRC halted its operations at least a couple of days ago. And I think what I find really fascinating is that Sri Lankan government is trying to act as if it's the first country, the first government in the world to which something like that is happening, and that there is no international practice and no international standards applicable to this situation. And having worked in dozens of conflicts, similar conflicts, I know that of course the government has the reason to keep people for a short time, screen them, but there are procedures and there are international norms that need to be followed.
Okay.
Keeping thousands of people behind coiled barbed wire is not the way to do it.
And over time, they will be followed.
Yes. Okay, Jan, I want to go to an email that we received from Rizvi Junaideen in Toronto in Canada, and he writes, the LTTE ruined innocent Tamils' lives for decades, and the Tamil diaspora added fuel to the fire with the support of the international media.
Right, you want me to comment on that?
Yes, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, absolutely. The position that my view on this is that that the discrimination against the Tamils has taken place over 60 years. And we say, our position, having researched this, and we say this, I've been saying this now for 2 years, is that this is actually a genocide. It's a genocidal process which has parallels to what the Nazis did to the Jews. And it starts with the fact that people were stripped of citizenship within a year of independence, which is exactly what the Nazis did to the Jewish people. I don't want to talk about scale. I just want to talk about process, about destruction of culture and language, of destruction of books, of all the books in the Jaffna Library, and ultimately this process accelerated to a massacre. What we have seen in the safe zone is that weapons, massive weapons, cluster shells, even phosphorus was used against civilians. So it has escalated, and this is a process that we've seen in history.
Yeah, but
but the point is that if there is a genocide, going, the community that is under attack has absolutely no option except to resist. Now, if it stops resisting, or there is no resistance, as there is right now, then what? Because now you say the LTT is defeated, there is no more LTT. What then arises is, under the Genocide Convention, there arises an obligation for the international community to step in. And that obligation has always been there, regardless of whether the LTT exists or not, but particularly now.
Okay, I think the point that this viewer is making here is that the LTT contributed to the violence that took place. Look, the LTT is also...
Well, exactly, but